And we are live on Facebook. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another New Jersey Constitutional Republicans virtual conversation. It's a great honor tonight to have Mr. Adam Coleman join me. Adam, thank you for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
What I want to do to begin with, Adam, I want to show people the extraordinary book that you've written that we're going to be discussing tonight. And that book is called Black Victim to Black Victor: Identifying the Ideologies, Behavioral Patterns, and Cultural Norms that Encourage a Victimhood Complex. And Adam, I'll have to tell you that with the very beginning in the introduction of the book, I would consider you a modern day Socrates. You're asking questions that many of us think, but don't dare verbalize. And you start the book out with right away, just like Socrates, asking the hard questions.
Yeah, the introduction was actually the last thing I wrote in the book. I felt like it made sense to kind of set up the premise for the rest of the book. Something I expressed before is, I wanted to write a book for a while. I just didn't have a particular topic. I did have an inclination to write about something about questions, but I had no idea how that would even work or anything like that. So that introduction was kind of like the perfect way of asking questions and kind of like encapsulating what I started to become fascinated with, questioning things. A lot of it revolves around a personal awakening, a political awakening, and not going along with the crowd and just starting to question everything. Question, the people I love, question why I behaved in a particular way, question everything. And you should be allowed to question anything as long as it's merit. And the number of questions I ask in those introduction pages, some of them are questions that I've asked myself, asked other people, wondered about as I spent nearly 9 months writing the entire book. And it was just like the perfect opportunity to just ask these questions. It took me basically about an hour to write all those questions and to do the introduction, because it was just sitting on my brain and I wanted to just put it all out there. So what you're reading in the introduction is not very carefully curated or anything like that. Didn't take me weeks to write. It was just straight up emotion. I was just question after question after question just flowing out of my head. That's what I tell people, just read the introduction. and they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. And then that sets up for the rest of the book. So I'm glad I came up with that concept of just asking questions, and it really, really hits people. Yeah.
There's no question about it, Adam. It's captivating in reading the introduction. And I just want to give one question that you asked, which is very profound. And you say, why must I live in the past with the pain of my ancestors instead of creating a future of hope? And that's essentially what you're doing with the rest of the book, is showing that there is hope, that we can make a positive move towards accomplishing individually. And we'll talk about the various chapters in the book, but it's a great first, one of the great first questions.
Yeah, I feel, as you're someone who likes history has merit to discuss, to digest and kind of figure out how does history kind of play into the present. But what I'm seeing more often today is the living in the past, the constant equating of one thing to another. And to me, as someone who likes history as well, I think that's kind of a bastardization of what history is supposed to be. History is supposed to be lessons, right? And then you make from it what you can, and then move on from there. And I find whether it's, talking about race or anything else, or even just people who have personal trauma, for example, you know, the reason they have that trauma they're holding on to is because they're constantly reliving that trauma in their head. They're constantly going back to that past event and they can't let it go. And so in many ways, when I'm talking about race, and maybe for some Black people, when they discuss race from a victim perspective, it's that re-traumatization that they're constantly reliving, even though they weren't the ones who lived in it, right? But it's this remind, that's where the equating part comes to it. They were slaves and you can be one too. The police or slave catchers are the police. You know, it's the constant fear mongering, equating of everything. And all it is to me is more manipulation to have them be subservient to whatever is going on in society, to basically wait for others to do for them, to feel like they're constantly oppressed, to feel constantly traumatized. So when I, as someone who's very interested in psychology and in human behavior, when I see some of like these activists who, express in such distress about certain things happening, obviously some people are just being overly dramatic, but some people, I truly believe they feel this particular way. They act like trauma victims. And if you spent years of people telling you this narrative, telling you to feel this particular way, equating your life as less than others, all of this messaging, and then boom, George Floyd dies with a knee on his neck. It's like everybody had one big emotional panic attack. And I asked myself, why? I didn't have that sense of emotion that everybody else did. And that's kind of what led for me to write the book. I'm looking around me and everybody is just being way overly emotional about a singular tragic event. I get 9/11, right? I get why everybody, regardless of where you lived at 9/11, because it felt like the country was attacked. That it's a somber kind of thing, a national sense of somberness, right? But for something like this wasn't 9/11. This wasn't of great tragedy on a humongous scale. There was one singular incident, a singular police encounter at one part in one city, right? And that was kind of complex, and even in how it came about. So it was very I don't want to say trivial, but it just seemed like something that just went way above what I ever thought it would turn into. Essentially, like, I can't really, granted it's kind of late, I can't really think too clearly about certain things, but I can't remember the level of outrage being as high since basically 9/11. Maybe you could say Trump winning, there's a level, but that still wasn't the same. This was not even a national situation. This was a worldwide situation because Black Lives Matter went international. And so, right. I kind of asked myself, what else happened in American history, at least since I've been alive, that was like this? And 9/11 is like kind of the closest thing.
I think it's interesting that, what we're discussing now with the George Floyd incident, chapter 1 is called A Gap in Honesty. And one of the quotes in that chapter, Adam, you say, quote, "The gap in honesty with ourselves is in part due to our pride, but it is a misrepresented pride." Kind of elaborate a little bit on that, if you would.
Yeah, like we are, people who are very prideful are unwilling to be honest about themselves. You think of yourself very highly. Let's say on an individual level, you see yourself as being very highly thought of, and oops, you make a mistake, right? We all make mistakes, we're human, but people who are extremely prideful will cover up that mistake, will excuse it, will ignore it, will, transform that mistake into actually being someone else's fault, right? It's a level of pride that I think some people have that is destructive for them. you know, there's something wrong with having so much pride that you're unwilling to be honest about your faults. And we all have
Mhm.
faults. You know, that was one of the things I was trying to convey. Like, if I'm talking about people being too prideful, I can't ignore my faults, which is why I talk very openly about some of the things that I did wrong in my life and in my behavior and my way of thinking. So, you know, as much as I'm critical of other people, I'm critical of myself in the book too.
That's right. And then chapter 2, we're talking about the predicament within the Black community. And incidentally, I don't like to talk in terms of black, white, yellow. I like to talk in terms of American and
Mhm.
human beings. And but yet we have to we have to make these we have to make these distinctions in order to have a discourse and conversation.
Right.
But let's talk about chapter 2 and the plight that's existed within the Black family. And you say in chapter 2, these men may also see nothing wrong with giving up because you're talking about the fathers of the Black family.
Mhm.
And there's a cycle that has existed, and you have experience with this yourself, and talk about that. And one of the big problems with the nuclear Black family has been disintegrated because of the absentee father, correct?
Correct. That's one aspect of it. So, and you're going to get to the next chapter, but for people to understand, you know, the easy
Mhm.
thing is to talk about men disappearing within the household, which is the case for my father, right?
Mhm.
And I go into detail about that in the book. But you know, the next chapter is talking about feminism and how impactful
Mhm.
feminism is in relation
Yes.
to Black American women. So, you
Mhm.
know, I know a lot of people lean on, you know, the government coming in and basically subsidizing fathers and leading to that. And I don't know how to necessarily equate the impact of that alone, but I truly believe that the the level of feminism and the feminist mentality that exists, you know, as much as when we talk about feminism, we think of, you know, the 21-year-old pink hair, no hair kind of situation. But in many ways, like, if you look at the behavior, the language of a feminist, it is all in Black culture. um, you know, the independent mindset, the I don't need anybody, I don't want to be dependent, the downplaying of marriage, you know, it is riddled within our within, you know, Black American culture. So I can't ignore that, you know, because it's politically incorrect to talk about it. And even within Black circles, it's very taboo to even be critical, right? Not hateful, but just critical of behaviors and mindset and mentality of certain Black women and how they approach relationships. But if we're going to be honest about things, if we're going to talk about things honestly, we can't just say Black men need to step up and raise their kids, because that's not the full picture. The other half of the
Mhm.
picture is that there are women who are purposely not approaching for marriage. They're purposely having children with men who have multiple children already, right? You know, I like to, and this is not just surrounding Black Americans, but just in general. I believe the statistic is about 90% of women have children, right? But obviously, not 90% of men have children. It's much lower than
Mhm.
that, right? And that's because there are men who have multiple children, multiple women. That's the reality, and that is being hyper focused on within Black America. You know, as much as we talk about racism, the number one issue facing Black Americans, and what I try to do is within that chapter, I talk about Black Americans, but I also talk about in general, you know, how it affects children, right? So sometimes I say Black, sometimes I leave the race out of it, because I want people to understand this is not just a Black issue. It is the biggest problem, but it's not just a problem for Black Americans. It's growing within American, and I would say even the West. But you know, the number one issue is the lack of family planning, right? We know what happens for single mothers when they have children out of wedlock and they have to raise children by themselves, essentially, right? Even if they have someone who is somewhat involved, economically, they are poor. And I would venture to say they're probably the poorest demographic within the country, right? And we don't really talk about it because we don't see it as that. There is this kind of rainbow picture as single motherhood as being, a life of independence, and you have your children and you're strong and you're mighty if you can do it. And if you're doing it, well, you're already strong and mighty, right? But I see single motherhood as a failing proposition. You could be the best mother, the well-intentioned. If you excel at one side, you're going to fail at the other. If you're a great mother who is attentive and always home with your kids, well, guess what? That means that someone else is taking care of you. It's probably the government, right? Or if you go out and you work hard, you make lots of money, get highly educated, and you're working a lot, someone else is raising your children, right? It is a failing proposition to put, and it's an unfair proposition to put any woman to that position, which is why I am overwhelmingly pro-marriage.
Question, and we know that the statistics show, Adam, that is it 70% approximately of Black families have one parent?
Yeah, a single parent home is about 70%, yes.
And then, of course, in the chapter, the broken Black father, you put in big letters, missing fathers create lost children. And of course, with the father not being there, it puts the added burden on the woman. Really, I believe this is where the feminism comes into play, because the man's not there to exert the masculinity, to put the fear of God, if you will, in the child, and to teach the child right from wrong. We know that the parents are the very first educators from day one. And it may be necessary to discipline the child with a little slap on the derriere, if you will, in a controlled and in a loving way, which is a good thing, and it's been done forever. Of course, what you're talking about relates to the laws of nature and nature's God, and how it comes right from God himself, and the shadows, if you will, that the father is a type of figure, a father figure, like the Heavenly Father. And of course, the mother has to bring the feminine attribute. It's a combination of both that works. And right. I really found, Adam, that the chapter on feminism was very eye-opening, because it puts an undue burden on the women to have to fill the void that the father has left, but it can't be replaced.
Yes. And this is one of those dangerous reasons, one of the dangerous things about saying that men and women are essentially the same. We're not. We're different. That doesn't mean that I'm better than a woman or vice versa. It just means that we're different. We have strengths that are different. Men, generally speaking, men carry a certain level of weight in some areas, and women carry a certain level of weight in other areas. What I'm advocating for is a balance of the both, right? Of the masculine and the feminine. And even within sexes, some men carry more feminine traits than masculine traits, right? But that's okay, right? That doesn't mean anything necessarily. So ultimately, what I'm talking about is the lack of care for that masculine energy, that masculine trait from a man within the home, right? Because I almost see feminism as like a women pretending to be men, right? You can act like one, right? But you're not going to be one. And that's actually what's happening, when, like you just mentioned the discipline part. I think there's something natural about how men can discipline in a strong nature and maybe not even use force, right? Sometimes it's the threat of force. Sometimes it's the presence, right? And we know how to do that. Men understand that if me and you are out and we have a discussion and it gets heated, we understand that the use of violence is present, right? It's a possibility. Women generally don't understand that, right? That's not their world that they live in. So, we have fundamental viewpoints that are different. And now you bring that into child raising and the usage of discipline, or expectation, or even outside of that, I talk a lot about purpose. One of the things I really, because I grew up without my father, but one of the things I started understanding the importance of a father was having my son and seeing my son enter the teenage years, right? And realizing like I remember when he was younger, I was saying, I can't wait till he gets older to kind of give him shortcuts, right? Because I stumbled and bumbled and I figured stuff out. And I can't wait to tell him the shortcuts that I learned so he doesn't have to go through that. So he can be farther ahead than I was. And at the age of 16, he is light years ahead where I was at the age of 16. I'm constantly making him focus on what he wants to do, right? And I'm always steering him in the direction of purpose. Whereas I didn't have my father, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I got into computers because I was kind of interested in computers, but I didn't know what direction. I didn't know how to use that. I didn't know which way. Some of the best advice I've ever gotten was from someone else's father, right? Who actually told me you shouldn't do that, right? Even though I was excited to try and do that. I thought I was going to be a mechanic. And my friend's father said, that's not you. And I was like, man, he just crapped all over my parade. But, a day later, I was like, you know what? I think he's right. And I'm glad I never went in that direction. But imagine if my father was around to kind of nip that in the bud and talk to me about it. Like, nah, I don't really see you as doing that. Are you sure about that? Have me question myself. And what if I would have continued in that direction? Who knows? So it's all purpose is extremely important for men. Men need to find a direction, build up their skill set. All these things are essential for earning money, for building purpose within their life, fulfillment, all of these particular things, and attracting the opposite sex at some point. So, these things are extremely important, but I see a lot of lost young men. I say the father is like the purpose compass because, without their father, you see kids being attracted to the streets. You see kids taking only validation from women. So they have reckless sex with women and then repeat the cycle. You see all different types of downfalls from not having a good purpose in life of which way to go. And, a mother can, and this is not to say a mother can't do that. We just do it differently and we're more effective of it.
Mm-hmm. And through this chapter and also the chapter on feminism, you describe lost boys and lost girls. And they're lost because they're not getting the combination of a mother and the father. And what I thought was interesting is that you'll say the problem is that many of the Black mothers bear zero fault by their daughters, when in many situations, the mothers played a pivotal role in the absence of the father. And that is driven essentially by feminism.
Yeah, because ultimately, we can talk about, bad parent, the bad father, right? But if we were to take a time machine and go back and look at what indicator gave you that this guy was going to be that guy, or why didn't you marry this guy? Well, you didn't marry him for a particular reason. So what's the reason? Most women want to get married, regardless of feminism or not. Most women do want to get married. So why didn't you marry this guy? Why did you pick this guy? That's where the questions kind of come into play. And when I have open, honest conversations with women in general, or even Black women, there is a level of fear when it comes to relationships. And the narrative around relationships and marriage is all about power, right? So women see a relationship with a man as giving up power, right? And that's not what a marriage is supposed to be, right? A marriage is not about a power struggle, right? But this is the narrative, this is the fear mongering about marriage. It's just about, same thing with divorce, right? Someone will come to you and say, why get married? 50% of marriages end in divorce. I could easily say, well, 50% of marriages stay together. Like, however, which way you want to look at it, you know, are you going to not drive your car because there's car accidents? Or are you going to be very careful when you drive, right? So it's however you want to present it. And I feel like a lot of women are scared out of marriage. A lot of women want children and have been fed the narrative that single motherhood isn't something to be shameful of anymore. There was a level of stigma before that's virtually gone today. And not only is it gone, but you can excuse it away, right? You can say, I was young. Oh, okay. And then people will move on. You could say, oh, well, you know, he wasn't emotionally there, and you can put all the blame on the guy, and that's perfectly fine. And some of it might be valid, but I will always come back to, why did you pick him? What, you think it's perfectly fine to have children with him, but you wouldn't marry him? Does that make sense? You know, so a lot of it is fear mongering. A lot of it is feminist ideology. Not feeling like you can put a man as a priority, even though you want marriage and you want children. You know, there's a level of fear. And I think a lot of it has to do with power. I think a lot of women feel it as some sort of power dynamic. Whereas men have no problem putting women as a priority whatsoever. Men understand you get divorced, and most men still want to get married, despite the divorce rates and all these other things, right? But women have been scared out of that position. And that's actually not the narrative. The narrative is men don't want to get married. No, men definitely want to get married. They definitely want to have children, right? But, you know, I think the area where it's lopsided is the women these days. They are very, very scared, and many of them are waiting until their later years when they realize that feminist ideology, go get your degree, you could do anything you want, all of that stuff ultimately leaves them miserable and alone. And we're seeing more and more women who are, you know, not married, growing old and alone by themselves, and they're miserable because of it. And it's because they followed a path that's essentially a path for most men, not for women. You know, to be this provider and sacrifice everything for this particular opportunity. And some of them miss out on having children because of it too, because they waited too long. They waited for marriage too long. So I've always said that the relationship market for women is cruel, right? Their time is limited. And for men, it's very different. But I think the feminist narrative, the feminist language and the ideology and the viewpoint, whether it's with Black women or any other race in the West, has heavily skewed the results for women.
Well, Adam, the chapter on feminism and fatherhood will certainly be an eye-opener to those who are reading it. And it was very, very interesting. And it takes a lot of courage on your part to come out and say these things and write these things down, but they're all designed to help people in these situations and to help keep these marriages together so that they're raising their children properly and give them a chance of success in life.
Yeah.
But I wanted to move on now. I wanted to move on now to chapter 4, authority and policing. And there's a lot of good information in here. And what I thought was interesting is that prior to the Great Society, if you will, Blacks were not being incarcerated as much. They weren't committing as much crime. But yet with the Great Society, it seemed as though the lid blew off. And of course, the Great Society was supposed to be helping Blacks in urban areas, and it seems to have had the opposite effect.
Yeah. And you know, you can almost measure it by single parenthood, the measure from there, how it increased and crime increased, poverty increased. You know, even though prior to the 1960s, you can say the economic wealth for Black Americans, you know, wasn't extremely high. For a lot of people, it wasn't extremely high. So you have things like Black Wall Street, for example. There were signs that things were increasing. I believe it's Thomas Sowell who talks about how it's like a feat that they Black Americans went from slavery and not being allowed to read to, I think it was something like 60 or 70% being literate in a matter of 50 years or something that to that nature, which is an incredible feat. That's incredible progress to be made. I might be messing up the numbers, but the merit's still there. So there were signs of immense progress that was happening for Black Americans from a educational standpoint, from an economic standpoint. There were unfairities about how, let's say, for unions, how unions were being formed to block out Black Americans from gaining certain access to certain jobs, right? So there are legit historical wrongs that were happening against Black Americans, against all different types of Americans throughout American history, right?
That's right.
But ultimately, they still had their family, right? Crime wasn't the number one thing to head towards, right? When you have a strong man in the household and you have children, and families were bigger back then too. And so you had all these children, you still had the mother and the father that were together. Crime wasn't the number one thing that would happen. Were there families that were dysfunctional? There's families that are dysfunctional today, even if they're intact.
Right.
That's not the point. The point is that the scale from single parenthood upwards almost mirrors the scale in crime rates trending upwards as well. So I put a lot on that, and partly because I understand just the very basics of the statistics where fathers impacts, when they're there and when they're not there. When they're not there, higher rate of going to jail. When they're not there, higher rate of committing suicide. When they're not there, higher rate of illiteracy. You can go down the list. Every negative trait that you could see, especially for boys, every negative trait that you could see, it trends upwards. And the crime rate is overwhelmingly a male issue. So you're talking about young men who are almost being disenfranchised within their own home. I think that's kind of the best way of putting it. And yeah, for a segment of the population, crime becomes a potential outcome. And so I asked the question, for a population that I fit in, a Black male population, which is about somewhere between 5 and 6% of the American population, yet for violent crime, we are almost half within that particular demographic. Why is such a small population at the extremes? Because ultimately we're talking about the extremes. Why are the extremes so high for a very small population of people? And I can't ignore the single parent aspect of it. I can't ignore those things, right? Obviously, there's nothing inherently violent about being Black, right? So this is not a race essentialism kind of viewpoint. This is talking about family dynamics. This is talking about human behavior. Because you take a child who is white, for example, you put them in the same exact scenario, you increase the odds in the same exact way. We know that this is a human issue, and this is a family issue. So in many ways, the book is kind of using Black Americans as a case study. Because our situation is so high, it's increasing for every other demographic. So it's to encapsulate, this is happening to us. If you want to know what's going to happen to the other demographics, if this keeps trending upwards for you guys too, this is what you're going to see. And that's what we are seeing. So as much as people like to say, America's one big prison state because we have the most amount of incarcerated people, I also ask myself, well, look at our marriage rates, look at single parent rates, because they're going up for everybody. And while white Americans are the lowest percentage, you guys are also the highest population demographic too, which means that there was a lot of single parent homes that are white.
Mhm. And chapter 4, Adam, really is a summary of the results of not having a father in the home, having feminism dominating the home, which is unnatural, and the effect that the feminism has had on the daughters and the sons combined. Really, authority and policing, which is the name of the chapter, shows us the result of it. And as we move on to the next chapter, I think it's very interesting that you talk about it's called poisonous black ideology, and talk to us about the cult of the black ideology and why it's so tough to crack, but it's there, and it's holding back Black Americans. And what is that black cult within Black America?
And just for people to understand, the reason I use cult, right? Cults, if you use just about any cult as an example, they tend to be very rigid. You're not allowed to question the ideology. They usually have leaders who are at the top, who help to dictate the narrative of the day, of the movement, or whatever you may call it. And people who dare to question the leadership, the narrative, the ideology, whatever you call it, are considered, no longer part of the group, right? They're excommunicated. They are slandered. They are disregarded. And in many ways, that's what happens for a lot of Black Americans. If someone like myself questions certain things, I am a coon, I am an Uncle Tom. These are ways of saying that I am not Black. Because one thing I think people need to understand is visually I am Black, but what they're talking about is ideologically I am not Black. And those are two separate things. So just like how, neo-Marxists say whiteness, right? What they mean is the ideology of whiteness is what they believe is, right? Not the skin of being white. So I can be a white supremacist because I believe in whiteness. It's the same type of usage of race along with ideology. So to some people, I might be questioning Blackness because I'm asking questions about why is it okay for us to only do this, but we can't do this? I'm asking too many questions. And so now I must be slandered. I must be excommunicated. I'm, all these particular things. I am visually Black, but I am no longer part of the ideology. I am no longer part of the group. It's the same reason why the LA Times can call Larry Elder the blackface of white supremacy, right? To someone who's not entrenched in this world, that makes zero sense. But to someone like me, I understand what they're trying to say. They're trying to say that he's allowing white supremacy to exist, and white supremacists use his Black face to all of this is complicated sounding, but ultimately it comes down to ideology, right? And there is a general framework of popular Black culture, and how you view things, how you see situations, how you react to situations, how you carry yourself, what you look like, what kind of music you like, where you go, what activities you're into. It is a whole list of things that I personally had to experience because I've lived all over this country. I lived in the majority white neighborhoods, racially mixed neighborhoods, and I just picked up things that I found to be interesting. I wanted to learn German because I thought German was interesting, right? That's not something that most Black Americans automatically do. And someone could easily say, you just want to be European, you just want to be white. No, I just thought it was an interesting thing, right? It's to me, it wasn't about a race kind of thing. But if I dress a certain way, act a certain way, and speak a certain way, behave a certain way, there's no question that I would be Black. No one would ever have a particular question about it. So, that's why I say behavioral patterns, mindset, what you advocate for, what you excuse, right? Because another thing that kind of aggravates me is, obviously most Black Americans are not criminals or have a criminal history, but a segment of them do. And when one of them does something, we are supposed to ignore it, right? Even if they are hurting other Black people. So when someone like myself talks about crime happening within a particular neighborhood and it's perpetrated by people that look just like them and that this is an issue, then they say, they call you the names, and you're not supposed to have these particular conversations openly, right, with someone like yourself, because you're not part of the group. We don't discuss these things outside of the group, right? We can talk about them within. We know it's a problem. We'll murmur amongst ourselves and we'll discuss certain things sometimes, right? But especially if you say it publicly, you're not allowed to air out dirty laundry. This is literally a phrase that people say. So it's a whole ideological framework that I started to realize that I've personally experienced throughout my entire life as being someone who maybe differs from other people, when all I'm trying to do is just whatever feels good, whatever I experience, whoever I meet, whatever sounds interesting. I never grew up specifically in a Black dominant neighborhood and felt that particular structure and felt that need to behave like everybody else. And so in many ways, I was free, right? I like certain things that are associated with Black culture. I don't like certain things, right? I'm free to choose whatever I want. And I've always kind of lived my life like that. And so as someone who's on the outside, I'm looking at this ideology and I'm like, does that make sense? Does it make sense that we can't question? If someone wants to live their life that way and they like this rigidity, that's perfectly fine. But what I'm questioning is, why are you telling me not to? And that's the whole kind of cult aspect to it.
And it's amazing that those within the cult will ostracize men like Thomas Sowell, men like Clarence Thomas, men like Dr. Carson, and all of these men, Walter Williams, there's a whole list of others. I mean, George Washington Carver, a historical figure, what a tremendous man. But all these men, a slave, but all these men endured, they accomplished, they worked hard, and they no different than any other nationality. But yet they repudiate these men because of their success within this cult. Is that true?
Yes, it's because there's a line that you have to toe, right? Even today, if you become a wealthy, successful, let's say Black man, you become a millionaire, whatever, there is a certain line that you have to toe. And in certain situations, you have to toe the victim narrative, right? No matter how successful, no matter if you got a leg up from someone who was white, you have a mentor who was white, you had all these different opportunities from different people of different backgrounds, and you worked really hard to get to the point that you're at. You're always supposed to toe the line of Black victimhood, which is why it seems, ridiculous when you see LeBron James essentializing his life and himself with, poor Black people, right? He may have been poor when he was very young, but trust and believe, he's lived a life of privilege since his teenage years, since his early teenage years. He hasn't had to worry about anything for a long period of time, but it's a line that you have to toe. LeBron might be the wrong example because I still question if he truly believes what he says about certain things, or if he's just saying things to get more clout, notoriety, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But you see this type of thing, and I get frustrated when I see millionaire Black people crying oppression. Like, and they want you to cry for them too, right? Oh, I didn't get the exact job that I wanted. I'm being oppressed. Wait a minute, you're a millionaire. Why am I crying for you? Boo-hoo. Take a lick.
It's hard to believe.
It's hard to believe, right? But that actually kind of goes into something else. That's the That's the weaponization of oppression, right? That's the
Mhm.
corporatization of oppression, of race, and all of these different things that you're starting to see from the Black elite, right? Not even starting to see, but you're seeing more of it post George Floyd, where they're
Mhm.
taking advantage of the racial sensitivity of the world. They're saying, the Brian Flores situation, where he spent his career in the NFL making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to millions a year. And now,
Mhm.
because he had a sham interview, which, by the way, was set up to be that way just from the jump because of the NFL rules,
Mhm.
now he's not getting a job because he's Black. And so
Mhm.
now he's weaponizing that, calling himself the Rosa Parks of the NFL, all of these
Mhm.
particular things. And that is the weaponization by the Black elite, by the Black economic elite, to call themselves oppressed, just like everybody else. And now all Black people are supposed to cry for them. And to me, I think that is ridiculous and borderline shameful.
Yeah, no question about it. Of course, you're talking about LeBron and Coach Flores in Chapter 7. You talk about ivory tower Black elites, and I wanted to put up a share screen, Adam. Let me see if I can bring this up for us. There's Dr. King. We're going to talk about him a little bit later.
Mhm.
Let's see here. Oh, I didn't have it. I thought I had it up, but I lost it. But what it was is it was a quote from Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington said, and you have this in the book, this is a quote, there is another class of colored people who make a business of keeping the troubles, the wrongs, and the hardships of the Negro race before the public,
Mhm.
having learned that they are able to make a living out of their troubles. They've grown into a settled habit of advertising their wrongs, partly because they want sympathy and partly because it pays. Some of these people do not want the Negro to lose his grievances because they do not want to lose their jobs. Booker T. Washington, from his My Larger Education, he wrote this in 1911. And isn't it applicable today?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of those things, once I had a friend tell me, and it makes a lot of sense. Once you create an industry, it's hard to get rid of it, right?
Mhm.
Especially once you create an industry surrounding sympathy, um, it's hard to get rid of it, right? Because you say, well, we're doing this for the good of other people, right? For the advancement of colored people, so to speak. And so now you have this organization that basically, the NAACP, what exactly do they do today? They are a front for what? What exactly do they do besides take money from political figures, take money from wealthy people? I was joking the other day, the NAACP Image Awards is giving an award to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, right? The shining examples of Black image. For what reason? It, it's that kind of thing that Donald Sterling, the former LA Clippers owner, received two
Mhm.
NAACP awards. Why? Because he paid them. Like
Mhm.
it's that kind of thing where people are able to buy reputation. It's the same situation that happened after George Floyd. Amazon, Walmart, Home Depot, you name the corporation, they all donated money to any organization that had the name Black in it or Negro in it. And they
Mhm.
did it, and they publicly stated they did it. It is a way to gain reputation, right? To make your image look good. Look at us at
Mhm.
Walmart. Even though we're $1 billion conglomerate and has forced middle America out of jobs, and we've done all these terrible things and foster, child labor in other countries, we've given $10
Mhm.
million to to help the advancement of Black Americans. Look what we did. Put that as a write-off for the tax season. Like, it's
Mhm.
that kind of thing. It's all show. It's all virtue signaling. It
Right.
means ultimately nothing. But to
Right.
go back to the book as far as the Black elite, what I noticed, especially post George Floyd, is
Mhm.
all these figures, all these millionaires and billionaires who are Black, who are the most successful people, not even just racially, just the most successful people within our country, who are not saying, here's how I did it. They're saying, I am the exception, right? You
Right.
can't do it, right? The system is set up for you to fail. Oh, how did I get through? Oh, yeah, I just snuck through the cracks, right?
Right.
It's
Mhm.
that level of arrogance and devious type of mentality. It's a very elitist framework that I see from people like LeBron James, um, Oprah Winfrey, who's now all of a
Mhm.
sudden on that train, even though arguably she was white women's favorite person for decades,
Mhm.
and was open to
Gosh.
speaking to anybody and everybody. And then all of a sudden she's having a panel of and telling white people they must beg for forgiveness. What in the world? You have a billionaire telling average white women that they have to beg for forgiveness. For what? For what reason? For giving you $1 billion? It's that kind of
Mhm.
ridiculous upside down world that we're now living in, but it's carefully curated, right? They're doing this because there's money in it, right? Whether it's sports journalists, whether it's
Mhm.
athletes, whether it's Oprah, whether it's intellectual types, Michael Eric Dyson, who's always on MSNBC, who sells his
Mhm.
books, who's always getting notoriety. Why? Because it pays to carry that message, right? He might be an ideologue, to be honest with you. He may truly believe it. But one thing he won't tell you is that I did it and so can you, right? That's not his message. His message is not that.
Mhm.
His message is what someone needs to do in a reconciliation for Black Americans, right? That is the majority of what his message is, as he's taking in
Mhm.
millions of dollars, right? And that's what essentially his net worth is, over $1 million. So, these are some of the most economically, uh, intellectually successful people that have ever existed in human history, even on a racial standpoint. Yet they look at average Black people, poor Black people, and say, me and you are the same, and you can't make it to where I made it, right? It is the most,
Yeah.
I see it as something that is incredibly insulting.
Yes.
And yet I feel like I'm on an island when thinking that. Like, don't you think it's
Mhm.
insulting that LeBron James essentializes his life with yours in the ghetto with no money, right? He may
Mhm.
have come from the ghetto, he was a child of a single parent home. He may have come for that, but he hasn't been that in a long time. And for him to essentialize
Mhm.
his life or spread the narrative that, I don't know, a cop may one day wake up and decide today's going to be the day I kill a Black person, the cognitive dissonance, he gets marched into arenas around the country by police officers.
Yes. All around him.
All around him. That's the
Yeah.
amazing part about it. So despite him saying that, guess what? Those police officers are there to help and protect him. And he
Mhm.
knows this. He lives in one of the most
Yes.
privileged, exclusive neighborhoods in the country. It's so infuriating to me when people of a particular economic class, and I
Mhm.
honestly, I don't really see this happening with any other demographic in America. There is no
Mhm.
Hispanic guy who's trying to say, I'm just like you, as someone in a
Yeah.
barrio, right? That doesn't
Yeah.
happen because people understand, like, no, you're some rich, famous guy. But that happens. The
Yeah.
level of pandering and the level of insult, it's an insulting behavior that
Mhm.
happens for famous Black Americans who want to have
Yep.
pity parties. There's a documentary series that's coming out. It's going to be all white, right? Some of those people are some of the wealthiest people who are over here complaining about white people. Like, the level of you got Showtime, you got you got a mainstream television network to give you money to distribute your anti-white propaganda as you are
Mhm.
shelling and millions of dollars. Like it's completely unbelievable. Yet these people are allowed to speak for the lower class. That's ultimately what what pisses me off.
And you know something as well, Adam, when you talk about this, we talk about the Civil War and pre-Civil War and the commonalities that exist between then and now. These elites that you're talking about are no different than the slave power influencing and telling and dominating the lives of the slaves, but also the people who lived in the South, the whites who lived in the South, who went and fought for the Confederacy. And it's amazing the commonality between the slave power of then and the elites of today. It's truly remarkable. And also, Adam, you were talking about affirmative action. And what amazes me is that people didn't see through Lyndon Baines Johnson when he says we have to give these people a head start. We've got to get them up further. We got to give them a better opportunity. And then that means we got to do all these things for them, because essentially, and he didn't say this, but he's implying that they can't do it for themselves. They can't run the equal race with whites or anyone else. We need to do this for them. And it was done for pure political expedience on his part, but it was also an insult to Black America that he would say something like that. Let everyone compete equally and not try to give certain favors to some. And we've seen how the Great Society turned out for urban America. And I just wanted to show you, hopefully I can get this screen shot up right to talk about. And here it is, Adam. Here's the quote I wanted you to see. I'm sure you've heard it, but is this prophetic? This is such a prophetic remark by Frederick Douglass, who incidentally is one of my heroes. And I don't think any Republican articulated initial Republican principles more succinctly than he did. And here's one that here's a quote that he said. He said, "Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe." And of course, we tie that into the victimization that's propagated, the continual poverty that's propagated, Adam, and also the demand for reparations. Frederick Douglass talked about this over 140 years ago, 50 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, the reparations conversation to me is, for some people it's symbolic, but I think that's also part of the problem with everything that surrounds Black Americans today. Everything is symbolic, right? Nothing is about results. Right. For example, affirmative action is symbolic. Oh, we're doing our part, but does that actually help anything? Does it feel good to be a diversity hire? Does anybody care? Right? You're wearing your Black Lives Matter shirt. It's symbolic, but does it change anything? Are you actually affecting anyone or anything? Or do you just feel like a better person because of it? Today, and it's not just with Black Americans, I talked about it recently when discussing Ukraine and Russia, right? Everything is symbolic. Oh, I stand with Ukraine. What the hell does that mean?
That's
you
true.
You type it on your screen. Okay. And what? You change
the latest fad.
Nothing. It's the latest,
fad now.
And it means, it means nothing. And corporations do it. Individuals do it. They change this and show the Ukrainian flag, and they have no idea what is actually happening. They don't know why stuff is happening. They just know that this is what everyone's doing. And the narrative is that, the Ukrainians are poor Ukrainians, and I need to show my solidarity. You don't, right? You don't need to show your solidarity publicly. I know someone who's Ukrainian. I know someone who was born in the USSR, when it was formed, but it's the Ukrainian state. And, they have family that's in Ukraine, and they're worried about their safety. they may have to leave and go to Poland, right? How you show that you care is with moral support with people who are actually involved, right? And you ask people, how could I help? You ask people, you talk to people. Much of what's happening today in the face of Black Americans is about dictating what should be done. And no one ever asks. No one ever asks,
Mhm.
like, how is this beneficial to anybody? No one looks at statistics. No one looks at anything. It's all feel good moments, right? Let's just hire more of them for our commercials. That'll make us feel good, right? Let's mandate
Mhm.
the respect that Black Americans should get. They can't do it on their own. Let's mandate it. It's all, thank you for your benevolence.
Mhm.
It's that kind of
Yeah.
world that we're living in. Um,
Mhm.
and to me, it's just utterly insulting that this is what it's come down to. We went
Mhm.
from, legitimate situations that happen in American society, you know, a long time ago, before I was born, right? And I'm 37, and I've even seen within my lifetime things change for the positive, right? But
Yes.
even within my lifetime, my experiences with racism and race, you know, was extremely seldom, extremely seldom.
Mhm.
And that's a good thing. That this is a very positive thing. And for our society to turn into white people feeling guilty for someone else's wrongdoing, you would actually, I thank you for mentioning before, you talked about how the slave power in the South not only controlled the slaves, but dictated for the poor white people who lived in the South as to what they should do. Now, today, average white people, even poor white people, now need to apologize for the elites in the past simply because they looked like them.
Mhm.
It's that kind of situation that we're having today, that I
No
wish
question.
people need to ask these things. And it's purposely also overlooked how there were slave owners of all different types of demographics, including Black, right? And I understand some people will say, well, some of them owned their own family members, which is true, but there were some that didn't. They understood
Right.
this was economic means. That's how the rest of the world saw slavery. And the fact that the
Mhm.
West was the first in human history to try to abolish slavery, yet they're the
Yes.
ones who are browbeaten about slavery. Meanwhile, we still have slavery within this world today.
Yeah.
Yet we're
Well,
supposed to
sure.
ignore that. We're supposed to ignore that because why? We're the worst ones. And I would say that this is part of the problem with having so much progress and so much success and so little issues, so little real issues, that we now have to invent issues. Or when people want to monopolize on issues, that we just fall for it. What else are
Yeah.
we to do? We don't have
Yeah.
to, most people don't have to worry about scarcity. Most people don't have to worry about if the electricity is going to come on. Most people don't have to worry about where they're going to eat next, right? Even if you're
Right.
poor, there's ways for you to have a meal. There's ways for you to get shelter, right? We have enough of a supply. We have enough that most people don't have to worry about those things. And
Mhm.
that's why it's so interesting when you see the most economically privileged or the most loud about what we need to do to change society.
Mhm.
It's astounding. It's astounding where we've come to. One less I'll say is, I've been around, like I said, all different demographics. It is strange the level of pandering that certain white people think they need to have simply
Mhm.
because I'm Black or someone else is Black. You know, it was almost overnight. I've been around liberal people. I was a former liberal, um, and even being around some progressives. But this is next level. What's happening? That's what like prompted me to write some of the stuff I wrote, because I've never seen this in my entire life.
What's incredible too, Adam, is the fact that the propagators of the victimization, those who propagate the Black cult within the Black family and the Black community, those who propagate the 1619 Project. It's truly remarkable, Adam, how they ignore the abolitionist movement that was essentially created even before the Declaration of Independence by the Quakers in Pennsylvania, by the Puritans in Connecticut, the great abolitionist movement that started in the 1830s, the great John Quincy Adams, who wanted to bring the nullification or the emancipation of the slaves to the House floor, and he was given the gag rule, and they shut him up, the Southern slave owners, back in the 1830s. And then we had a civil war. And if anyone doesn't think that it wasn't over slavery, they're just ignoring history. All of the Confederate states in their declarations of Confederacy said that slavery was the essential reason for their secession. And Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, in his famous Cornerstone speech, said that the slavery, the peculiar institution, as he called it, is the cornerstone of the Confederacy. And of course, the Republican Party was created to stop the expansion of slavery into the territories. And a war breaks out. And Lincoln was trying to be faithful to the Constitution, which unfortunately did have a provision for slavery in it as a compromise to the slave owners in South Carolina and Georgia at the Constitutional Convention. But the fact is that the abolitionist movement became Republicans. The Republicans unified around the idea of preserving the Constitution of the Union. And they fought a war, and many of these men went to war because they believed in the self-evident truth that all men are created equal. And Lincoln talked about that at the Gettysburg Address. How is it that those who propagate this victimization don't recognize the tremendous sacrifice that was made by the Union and the Yankees and the Republican Party specifically? And what amazes me is that the victimization, the people who believe in Black victimization and so forth, they are no different than the lost causers or the neo-Confederates today who try to put down what Lincoln did and put down what the Union did and try to discredit what they did in giving their lives. Lincoln literally gave his life as the first civil rights leader because 2 days before he was assassinated, John Wilkes Booth heard him say that he was going to give Louisianan Black soldiers who are educated the right to vote. So again, there's the dichotomy that blends together between the neo-Confederates and those who they call themselves woke or the social justice warriors. They're both the same in their evaluation of the Union and Lincoln.
Yeah, that's true. Why do they ignore these aspects? It's because, for many of them, they spent their entire careers hypothesizing how the essential premise that Black Americans have always been oppressed and they're still oppressed today. A lot of people make money off of this narrative, especially today. It's a shame because it's almost like how we talk about BC and AD, before Christ, after death, right? Now we talk about before George Floyd and after George Floyd, because the narrative changed, the whole world changed. It became a racial awakening, right? And not just in America, but even overseas, like in the UK, for example, it became a racial awakening for everybody because the narrative became true. He was the example. In many ways, it was like a public crucifixion, and he was the racial Jesus. And now everybody had to explain, why did he die? And then it became the explanation that George Floyd is not abnormal. It's happening everywhere. And that this is just like in slavery days and so on and so forth. So, a lot of people make money off of saying that, we are ultimately oppressed. We will always be oppressed. Nothing has ever changed. Nothing will ever change, so on and so forth. Not many people make money by saying the otherwise, so I could easily, let me tell you, it's very easy to repeat a certain line that makes a lot of money, I could, if I could have written the opposite book and almost guaranteed that I would have made it on MSNBC. Just with a certain level, I have a certain level of intelligence and want to and know how. I could have
Mhm.
written the exact opposite book, and my book would be in libraries. I could have written the
Yeah.
exact opposite book, and people all over the world would want to talk to me about what it's like to be oppressed. And wow, I never saw it that way about what it's like to be Black in America, right? You can make so much money, and I could have an actor's face on it and talk about white oppression all day long and make a killing doing so, right?
Yeah.
The people who don't make any money, to me, aren't smart enough. I don't even think the market is saturated enough to not make money off of Black oppression.
Mm.
The so
Remarkable.
for
Well, Adam,
me,
you're to be
yeah,
commended for writing this book, and it's important that people read it and to get it and to publicize it and to share it with their friends and their family. Like I said, I was just enamored reading this book, and it taught me so much that I didn't know. And the other thing I wanted to discuss with you, Adam, is this idea
yeah,
of white supremacy.
mhm,
I don't know of a white supremacist. I've lived, this is my 60th year, and I've known people who are bigoted. I've known people who may say things that are unkind of Blacks, but the real white supremacists were the Confederates. And there is a neo-Confederate there may be neo-Confederates today. I don't know of any, but these men actually believed that slavery, and they taught this, it was called the positive good theory, that they thought that slavery was a good thing for the black slaves, because they wouldn't be able to manage or govern themselves. And incidentally, they wouldn't let them read. They wouldn't let them read the Bible. And so that they propagated this idea, and they latched on to Darwinism and science at the time that was proving that some people are better than others, and some people have evolved higher than others. And of course, prior to that, everyone understood the idea that God is no respecter of persons, and that we were all created in the image of God. But yet the
mhm.
Confederates come along and say they were true white supremacists. There's no question about it. And there was white supremacy in the North as well, but not nearly to where it is propagated and advertised today. I hear this white supremacist, the white supremacy here and there. Well, it's very different than the actual white supremacists of the Confederacy, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And in many ways, when people talk about white supremacy, um, they usually link it to disparities, right? That's one of
Mhm.
the most frustrating things that I hear all the time. If there is a disparity in anything that shows Black people in the negative, then it's because of white supremacy. If it's in the positive, well, then it's hooray, Black people, they did everything right. So,
Yeah.
if there is a company that has a disparity in hiring, well, it must be because of white supremacy, it must be because of racism, or whatever buzzword you want to use. um, but we never look at, well, for one, what's the field, what's the demographic in that particular area. you know one of the things that I feel like screaming from the hilltops all the time is that, well, actually there's two things. One, we are 13% of the population. I want to
Mhm.
say that all the time. We are 13% of the population. Just because now we are 50% of the commercials, right? We are actually 13% of the population. So this expectation that Black Americans are going to magically fill up boardrooms across the country, in companies are going to have 50% Black Americans. There's not enough of us. That's just
Mhm.
population. That's not even getting down to educational level, industry, you name it. There is not enough of us. Another thing that people don't understand is, I don't think I even put it in the book. I don't remember if I did or not, but um, I believe the number is either 62 or 65% of Black Americans live in 10 states. right? And you could probably name those states because we live
Yeah.
primarily in urban areas. So
Mhm.
we are in very specific locations.
Mhm.
And we're scattered out from there in smaller numbers. So
Right.
with that being said, you can't go to a company in Utah and say, how come you don't have enough Black people? Because there's not enough of them that live here, right?
Yeah.
A lot of things are just pure numbers. It makes zero
Mhm.
sense when people try to argue certain things as to why there aren't enough of people of where there is not enough people of a bunch of different demographics that live in every single area. I think part of
Mhm.
the problem is our media is city focused, right? Our news media is in New York and DC nationally, right? And so to them, living in multicultural cities where there's lots of Black
Mhm.
people, to them, not seeing enough Black representation seems weird because they see Black
Mhm.
people all the time. But the reality is, New York and DC is not America, right? America
Right.
is many of these places are rural. Many of these places are very sparse in people, not just Black people, just any other demographic. It's very spread
Mhm.
out, and that's a bigger problem with the media landscape, and that's why they ignore the average person, is because all they think of America is city life when the vast majority of this country is not. It's rural or suburban. And so it's this idea of we're supposed to fill these gaps, and we're supposed to be all over the place, and there's supposed to be no disparity ever, as if we're 50% of the population. We're not.
Mhm.
We're 14, we're 13, I would say 13% of the population. And we're in very, very select cities, especially throughout this
Mhm.
country. So, ultimately, I really wish people would understand that. And for the people who are listening, always keep that in mind when they're trying to find white supremacy in something. 9 times out of 10, they're saying white supremacy is here because of a disparity,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And then you say, okay, well, why is there a disparity? They never go any further than the claim, right? Why
Right.
is there a disparity? Is it because of demographics? Is it because of interest? Is it because of field? Is it because of anything, right? Prison population. Oh, there's a
Mhm.
disparity. That's true. Why is there a disparity? White supremacy. Okay, well, I
Mhm.
can easily point to what happens in single parent homes. 70% of the demographic grows up without their father in the home. What happens to any child when they don't have their father in the home? Let's look at the statistics, regardless of race,
Mhm.
because this is a human issue, right? That's
Mhm.
not a legacy of racism. That's not a legacy of slavery, because like you said earlier, 1920s, this wasn't a problem. 1930s, this wasn't a problem, right? We can
Mhm.
look at the role of family. You had legal oppression in part of the country. This still was
Yeah.
not an issue. So
Yeah.
we have more freedom today. We have more economic opportunities today than any other time. Black Americans are the most economically privileged Black people in human history of any continent, right?
Mhm.
Why can't we take advantage of that, right? And looking at these disparities and trying to point and find some sort of problem and labeling it white supremacy, one takes real situations where there's real white supremacy and makes it sound trivial, just like claiming everything is racism. It makes actual racism unbelievable, non-believable, diminishes it. No one cares. It's the boy who cried wolf,
Mhm.
right? And that's much of what we see today. It's almost to the point, if someone's labeled a racist, I'm kind of like, I don't believe they're a racist. I want to learn more about them, because that's how loose it's thrown. There's no
Yes.
seriousness to it anymore. It is an empty claim,
Right.
and that's a shame, right?
It's a weapon. It's a verbal weapon.
It's a verbal weapon. Um, but yeah, the claims of white supremacy, much of it is media driven. It's
Mhm.
buzzwords, it's clickbait,
Right.
and that's how it gets people emotionally charged. They want to read
Right.
more about it. You know, and much of it's empty. And I think more and more people are realizing that.
They want to learn about white supremacy. All they have to do is read about Jefferson Davis and Alexander Stevens and Roger Taney and James Calhoun. There's plenty of history there showing that, and we've come a long way from that, and largely because of the winning of the Civil War. Of course, we can talk about the dreadful decision that was made to put Andrew Johnson on the ticket in 1864 to appease the New York Republicans, of all things, and bringing Andrew Johnson was a disaster. And Reconstruction, which has a lot to do with the way everything has turned out in the 20th century, would have been much different with an Abraham Lincoln who believed in charity for all and malice towards none and charity for all. But before we start to wind down, Adam, there's a couple more issues I want to hit on. I thought you really gave a very poignant description of an experience that you had, which has plagued Black America and really keeping it at that 13%. And that is the horror and the injustice of abortion.
Yes. It's been painted as one of those things as women's liberation, to basically kill an unborn child. For myself, so people have a little bit of understanding, I was what you would call a default Democrat, right? Kind of like a default liberal type. But, I considered myself somewhat informed. I paid attention to the news, and had certain viewpoints and so on and so forth. But in my liberal framing, I was pro-choice at one point, right? And even at that time, people who were pro-choice understood what abortion was. They understood that it is the killing of a child. They never tried to pretend otherwise. Today, what is happening is it has become normalized to the point of celebrating your abortion. It has become to the point of saying this is about women's health.
Reproductive freedom.
Reproductive freedom. And they're completely masking even a clump of cells. Like, that's the thing. That wasn't a conversation that we had before. It was legal, safe, and rare, right? That was the mantra, right?
40 years
for people
ago.
who, right, just a few years ago. And then all of a sudden, the progressive extremists started bragging about how many babies they killed, right? As it's something to be proud of. And it's disgusting. But what I talk about is because, I had a relationship where she decided to have an abortion, and I partly blame myself for not talking her out of it because I was of a pro-choice stance. I did not want to interfere in her decision. But as a man and as a father, that was the wrong decision. You protect your child, even if they're unborn. Yes. And so, that was my sin. That is something that I'm, I think about, and actually writing it out and admitting my fault has helped to not think about it and put so much weight on it for myself, because I'm trying to advocate for the otherwise. If I can save someone from going down that route, then, I'll be very proud of that. But even with that being said, in my pro-choice stance, I felt shameful. I didn't feel comfortable with it. In some ways, for a man, it's kind of like a rejecting field that she wants to get rid of your child. And I really hate how abortion for men seems like this. Every guy's cool with it, and men don't like children. Men don't want children. They have no idea, right? And this is the feminist mindset, that men are apathetic when it comes to their kids. I wrote an article talking about this, how, it's our child too. That is half our kid. When they come out of the womb, we're responsible for them, right? But men realistically today have zero say as to what happens to the child before they're born. She could run off to another state and kill that baby, and you have no say. You can't do anything about it. There's no legal recourse. You can't stop her. You can't do anything, right? That's the reality of abortion. And I wanted to paint a picture of men do care about abortion. They have every right to care about abortion because it's their baby too. And I think painting a picture saying that this child is not a child, but saying it's a clump of cells and she can decide what she wants to do with these cells, to say that, well, this thing, I've heard people refer to it as a thing, is attached to the woman. So the woman gets to decide. It's all a bunch of mental gymnastics, right? Because they'll easily recognize that it's a child that comes out, right? So what do you think she's carrying in there? A watermelon? Like, why are we playing these games? And they're playing these games because there's an entire industry around killing babies. There's an entire industry of activism, for claiming women empowerment, for all these different things. Give us money, we'll fight for abortion. How insane does that sound when you put it in the perspective of they're fighting to kill babies? They're fighting for your right to kill a child, right? And then they want to play the emotional tactic of, well, what if a woman is raped? That's still a baby, right? I used to have that position, like, okay, maybe if she's raped, she can, do it. I know someone who's a product of rape, and they're like, I should die because someone conceived me in an inappropriate way, in a terrible way, in a heinous way.
Yes,
I should die because of that.
Criminal.
It's a criminal thing.
But right, and Adam, you're so right that what makes a child conceived in rape any less of a human being than a child conceived in the love of the father and the mother and their relations? There are still human beings. And what did we believe? Self-evident truth. All men are created equal.
Yeah.
That includes those that are conceived in rape. And what I wanted to say as well, Adam, in chapter 11, it's called Over-Reliance on Government. And I want to tell you, the first paragraph that you put in here, it's almost as if you were reading some of the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans' information about summarizing government, because you did an outstanding job with this. Really impressed with the functions and purpose of government, which we talk about all the time, which the founders wanted or intended to be much more limited in activity and in scope than what we have today. But you do a brilliant job in this chapter of talking about the government involved from the very beginning in the ghettos and in the urban areas with the subsidized housing, and then welfare and healthcare, and right to from cradle to the grave. Our government has got it's subsidizing the urban areas, and it's a vicious cycle that can't be broken and people can't get out of.
Yeah, and some people do. I've talked to people who are like, I use public assistance for a short period of time, but I feel like whether we talk about welfare or public schools or anything, what ends up happening is the American solution is throw more money at it, right? Yep. Even if it's failing, throw more money at it. Public schools are failing, throw more money at it. That'll fix it. But we don't talk about the corrupt nature of government or people within government, right? So you're incentivizing them to fail. And much of it, we talk about welfare. If the person is ripe for it, you're incentivizing for them to do nothing. So you keep supporting them. So there are people who take advantage of the system. Absolutely. There are even wealthy people or corporations that take advantage of the federal government to get more subsidies, that lobby the government to get more subsidies. All these, they're taking advantage of the government. They're taking advantage of the system. The colleges.
Look at the colleges and universities. I'm sorry to interrupt that, but look at the colleges and universities. Now we have the debt has to be forgiven.
Yeah. Right. That's more progressive simple-mindedness to just think, oh, well, we'll just erase the debt and everything is good. No, you don't change what the actual problem is. The actual problem is that lenders know they will always get paid. Why? Because you can't file for bankruptcy. So they're going to give money to anybody and everybody. Why do you think there's all these for-profit colleges that popped up in the past 5-10 years, right? They're because they realize the laws are written for them. You can't file bankruptcy, so we'll give a $50,000, $100,000 to Joe Schmo who makes $20,000 a year. Even if they think that one day magically I'll make more, we'll give it to anyone and everyone. Why? Because we will always get our money and we can charge them ridiculous interest and people don't read the fine print. And why wouldn't you if you're any type of lending institution? So go ahead and lobby the federal government to print more money, to spend more money, to give it to the same type of institutions that you complain about as being greedy and corrupt and inept. Give them more money, right? And keep the system in play so that in another 20 years, the same thing will happen again. You know, it's why I've become, in many ways, sounding very libertarian, but I just realized the usage of government is so, especially on the federal level, is so ridiculous. Like once you make it past the second level of thought as to how would this actually work, rather than saying, I just want it to work, right? Which is a very progressive mindset. Like, for example, I've heard people say, there's a housing crisis or there's a homeless crisis. And that money that we gave to the military industrial complex, which arguably we can argue about that, we could have just used that money and put all these homeless people in houses, as if that's the problem, as if the problem for all these homeless people is just that they couldn't find a house, right? No, many of them are drug addicts. Many of them have mental issues. It is a far deeper issue than just saying, give them a house. In New York City during the pandemic, nobody was going in the hotel rooms. So what did they do? They said, housing in these luxury hotels, right? You know what they did? They went outside and laid on the street and did drugs. The issue isn't housing. It's that they do the same type of thing when it comes to government. You know, just throw more money at the problem, give them more of this, give them more of that, as if that would be the solution. And overwhelmingly, the more I look at things, the more I see that either the solution is less government or no government. So I'm not one of those people that says we should have no welfare, but we need to have some sort of guidelines around this, right? We call it a temporary, I forgot the technical term, the term they use for it, but it's supposed to be like a temporary
welfare.
Yeah, welfare. I forgot the actual acronym that they use for it, but it's like T something, but the T stands for temporary. But we all know that there are people who've been on welfare for decades. Yes. You know, so obviously there's nothing temporary about it, especially if you do it in the right way. You know, when you're incentivizing failure, like that is the government's fault for doing so. And that's what I see in so many different ways. There is a flaw. Welfare is something that can be useful to help people to get out of a situation, right? But the problem is that government, in many ways, the more money and the more power that you give them, they're incredibly inept. You know, they don't know how to check and balance. They don't know how to be efficient. That's not their purpose. Their purpose isn't to be efficient. That's what generally private institutions are for, to be efficient. Well, welfare programs have their purpose, have their usage, but the way it's currently constructed, it's easily abusable. It's easily a way to promote, families that are torn, terribly run, broken homes. It's very easy for people to just rely and stay in severe mediocrity with no reliance on themselves, with no essential power to do anything for themselves, to be okay with the below status quo, of just staying in, whether it be government housing, whether it be waiting to make sure I get approved for this. It's a life of just waiting to see if the government will sign that paper, will check that form to get this money so I can survive another month, I can survive another year, right? And I think that route of viewing government, whether we talk about welfare or whether we even talk about politics, as government, especially the federal government, as the end all be all to all political issues or economic issues or whatever, that we just have to run to Congress, and Congress needs to do something about it. And it, in many ways, we are ignoring, like what you said, what the ideal framework was, is to have the states have control over what happens within the state. And we've lost that. We've lost that viewpoint. And I really wish that we understood. Yeah, federalism. I really wish that we could see that the more local you go, the more power people have. And, you know, and waiting for Nancy Pelosi to do something is a complete waste of time. Or like when people say, how come Congress has a low approval rating because they don't do anything? Actually, that's a good thing. They shouldn't be doing anything. There's supposed to be congestion, right? Because the more you have them do stuff, that's when we get the Patriot Act. That's when we get this overwhelmingly big, ridiculous nonsense like
expansion of power.
Right, this expansion of power,
especially in the executive branch.
Yes, exactly.
Of course, that's what FDR did. The whole world changed, Adam, with FDR and the expansion of powers. And he said he was going to. He followed through with his promise in his inaugural address of expanding the executive powers, and now all of the progressives imitate that. We see that here in New Jersey with Phil Murphy and an unlimited 260 or approximately 260 executive orders. But before we go, Adam, I want to touch on a couple of things. One, urban terrorists and criminal martyrs that we read of in chapter 13. I thought it was a very, very riveting description from the very beginning of this human being's life, being born in the urban area, being born in poverty, being born, but not necessarily the poverty as the problem, but the fact that there's no father there. The mother is trying to fulfill all these different duties that she's not equipped to or created to do, and then getting involved with the gang, and the gang is the father figure, and getting some sort of satisfaction and attention from those people, and getting involved with crime and seeing friends get shot, and then eventually the death of the individual himself. I thought it was riveting reading about that, and it really came alive to me, the horrors that exist for many of these people trapped in that cycle of violence and immorality.
Yeah, morality is actually a really good word to use. What I wanted to do with that chapter, like you said, is to give a story. Obviously, I didn't experience anything like that, but I wanted to tell a story and just imagine what it's like to be this person who is in many ways suicidal and homicidal, who doesn't really care much about their life because life has let them down, who sees morality as being something that's kind of subjective to survival. And it's a very chaotic and destructive life for this type of person. In many ways, they become the terrorists that they didn't like in the very beginning. They become that evil that they used to complain about. But sometimes being evil gets you a level of respect that you think you're getting, but it's fear. And I also kind of talk about how these same terrorists, we cry for them after they are killed, and why we weren't there for them when they actually needed, and they could have been saved and they could have been helped. So the viewpoint of, allowing these guys who are in many ways terrorizing the community and showing up and saying, well, who killed them? And depending on who killed them, it depends on your level of outrage. They were a child at one point and no one cared. They were a
Mhm.
child at one point. No one was there to weep for them. Al Sharpton doesn't show up to
Mhm.
help them to build a community center. No one's over in
Mhm.
their community advocating. I'm sure, listen, it depends on where it's at. There are people who have small nonprofit organizations that are trying their best to do what they can. But we just talked
Mhm.
about how much money there is in Black victimhood. That money could easily be going towards something that's positive. You know, we used to talk
Yes.
about the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club. What happened to that? We used to have commercials about that. What happened to that?
Right. It's
You
true.
know, the viewpoint of family and helping children, um, in many ways, has kind of disappeared from the
Mhm.
mainstream narrative. And now it's
Mhm.
about teaching children how the rest of the world is sinful and evil, and
Mhm.
over educating children, or not over educating, telling children information that they're not prepared to handle at a very early age in a very slanted manner about how they're inherently sinful and all this other nonsense, or how they're inherently victims, right? Like, ultimately, sometimes the people who do terrible things, um, are turned into that by society, by neglect, by family neglect, by societal neglect, by the neglect of their neighborhood. Um, you know, and one other thing I want to say, we always talk about poverty and crime as if
Mhm.
poverty is the reason for crime. But
Mhm.
crime overwhelmingly, especially violent crime, is a lack of morality. We
Mhm.
talked about, pre-1960s, Black Americans were of the lower, poorer economic class. The crime wasn't there. Why? Because we were heavily religious, right? We
Yes.
had a sense of morality, right? So, there are poor countries all over the world. They would look like Armageddon the way people describe how crime leads to, or how poverty leads to crime. No, you can go to India, right? Does crime exist in India? Sure, but many of them are very
Mhm.
religious, right?
Mhm.
They they have, whether they be Buddhist or Muslim, they have a level of religion and how they carry themselves within, in their lives. And so what I'm talking about is a lack of morality that allows for some child to grow up and to become a terrorist and see that as an option, right? And use the excuse of needing to survive as the reason to become immoral. It, it's
Mhm.
it's just an excuse. We've been poor, and we just talked about government's there. Government can give you
Yep.
guys money. Government can do all types of subsidizing for your family. The choice to become immoral is a failure of the family. It's the failure of teaching a child moral values and having the child understand the importance of having a moral value. It's the failure of a community that doesn't hold that child back from going down a path that is obviously negative. It is a sign of societal failure, but starting with the family. So, you show me a child who grew up in a happy, healthy home with both parents, uh, whether it be economically challenged. um, you're going to be hard fought to find that child who says, "Nah, I'm going to run to the streets and shoot people." Right? It's going to be very. I'm sure it happens, but it's going to be far and few in between. And
Yep.
so, having religion, having God in people's lives, having a sense of morality, having all of these things exist within the family home. This is why I go back to the father. The father is supposed to help with the discipline. The father is supposed to help with the introduction of faith. The father is supposed to be there to do all of these particular things to show them a sense of morality. Even if someone is listening and they're not of a particular faith, there is a sense of morality that you have a duty to teach your child. You do not
Mhm.
take what's not yours. You do not hurt people for no reason. You have the right to defend yourself, but to assault people is something different. This is a sense of morality that everybody, regardless of your faith, is supposed to understand within our country. And so for a child to believe that taking a gun and shooting recklessly in the streets, or to break into people's houses, to break into people's cars, to take from other people as well, I was just doing it for survival, as if that's the
Mhm.
okay reason. No, it's a lack of morality.
What's amazing too, Adam, as you talk about this, we hearken back to the very words of our first president, the father of our country, in his farewell address, that he said that religion and morality are indispensable supports for a free republic. And like all good leaders in your book, you identify the problems and then you offer the cure. You offer after the diagnosis, you're offering the prescription. And that goes back to morality, to religion, to reading God's word, and self-government. Self-government, government starts with us. When we look in the mirror every day, government starts with us, and us rejecting evil and eschewing sin, and being moral and loving our wives and teaching our children and being kind to our fellow man, doing unto them as we would want them, the golden rule. It starts with us every day, and that's what you're saying in this book. There isn't going to be a quick fix. It starts one individual at a time, and that's essentially the beginning of the victor, of the Black victor, is implementing the morality, implementing the humility before God, asking him for that strength, and reading his word and feeding off of his word, the Bible.
Yes, amongst other things, you know, in this political climate and the racial climate and all these things, one of the most important solutions is finding commonality with other people.
Mhm.
You know, within that chapter, I talk about meeting a guy named Phil online, and you know, he's also conservative minded, and we would just talk about different things. And we connected because we both grew up without our fathers in our lives. He doesn't even know who his father is. And yet he is white, he's a veteran, and he's in his 70s, right? We're completely different, but we found a way to have commonality. And he's been, to this day, one of my biggest support systems. You know, he's always supportive. He's not super on the internet these days, but he'll message me and he says, you know, congratulate me. He'll tell me about, you know, I met this person, I told him about your book. You know, he's always being supportive of me. And it's one of those things I greatly appreciate. And I actually got to meet him in person a few months ago, and that was great. So it's one of those things where you never know what you could learn from other people.
Right.
And you know, for me, before I wrote this book, I didn't have a public profile. I didn't really talk about my personal politics, you know, except for very select people, or even my view on race. And you know, people tell me I'm brave, but I didn't get there by myself.
Yeah.
I got there from support from people, support from my now wife. You know, she was my girlfriend at the time when I started doing this. I'm sorry, no, she was my fiance at the time when I started doing this. You know, people like Phil, you know, and select friends who were supportive, who would read, you know, bits, pieces here. He would give me words of encouragement. And all these people are not of the same demographic. They all look different, but they all have a value that I really appreciate. They're all supportive. So, you know, this idea that you can, the idea that you can only gain value from people who look like you is utterly ridiculous.
No question. And that's why I appreciate what you've done with this book. And I'm learning things, like I said, that I never knew. And that's why I encourage people to get out and read this book. And before we go, Adam, I'm going to attempt to put a couple more quotes up to talk about. And this is really amazing to me, because we've all heard the "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Martin Luther King, great words. And the thing that amazes me, Adam, is that the victimization, the cult, the progressives, the woke, they completely repudiate this comment. And I say all the time that the progressives are more interested in what a person is rather than who the person is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the same type of mindset that says we need to have a black woman as a Supreme Court justice, right?
Yes,
As if all
same
black women
thing.
think the same way, as if having a black woman represents something of a particular mindset. You know, it doesn't matter which black woman, you just got to pick one. It's
Exactly.
to feed into the superficialness of many progressives that exist in our society, as physical representation as being the, you know, the marker of something important. But here's the funny part: as much as they talk about having that physical physical representation, they ignore
Mhm.
Clarence Thomas.
Yeah, can you believe that?
Yeah.
It's a double standard, that's for sure. And then I wanted to show you this quote. This is a very succinct quote that I thought was very appropriate. Martin Luther King said, "We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools."
Mhm.
Of course, we're all brothers and sisters. We all come from Adam. We all come from one race, and that's the human race. The
Mhm.
pigment color of our skin, that's just a difference, but it's not what sets us apart. We're still a human being. We're still all created in the image of God, and that means in the likeness of God. We can understand the ideas of eternity. We can
Right.
create things and engineer things, just like, and we all can do that. It's not based upon the pigment of our skin.
No, you're absolutely right. Um, I think we need to remember that, especially for people who are of a particular faith. Um, are you a Christian first, or are you black first?
Mhm,
You know, are you a Christian first, or are you white first? You know,
mhm,
and if you claim to be a Christian, you should be a Christian first and understand those general
mhm,
principles. So yeah, there are ethnic differences, there are cultural differences, and those are all,
mhm.
you know, features. You know, those are, you know, just because there's a different model car doesn't mean that they're not cars.
Right. That's exactly right. And all the different cultures and all the different, it adds so much, it adds so much interest, and it adds so much beauty in some regards, and the differences here and the there and there. Imagine if everyone was just like Adam and everybody was a clone of Adam, but no,
Yeah.
God made it very, very diverse, very, very different. But I wanted to read this quote. Um, Adam. And I think that this, of course, this was written from the jail cell. Martin Luther King was placed in Birmingham. And these are very profound words, and words that we take very serious as constitutional Republicans, because we believe in restoring the ideas of the laws of nature and nature's God within policy and platform. And here's what Martin Luther King said. He said, quote, "There are just laws and there are unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. One who breaks an unjust law must do it openly, lovingly. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and willingly accepts the penalty by staying in jail to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the very highest respect for law," unquote. That's exactly what Martin Luther King did, Adam.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with what he's saying. You know, just because something is law doesn't mean that it's justified. Just because the government imposes something doesn't mean it's justified. You know, we could look at COVID
Right.
restrictions. You know, just because, you know, the governor says you must do X, Y, and Z doesn't mean that his edict, one, his edict is not law, and two, his edict is justified. It's right, or it's constitutional. You know, and so
Mhm.
that's why it's up to people to fight against things that, even if they seem small, but if they're tyrannical, you know, it's big enough to fight for, or to at least dispute, question. So I completely agree with what he's saying.
Right. And what he's also saying, and Augustine did, and theologians and just politicians and representatives throughout history understand that man-made law, civic law, must be commiserate with the law of God in order to be legitimate. That's exactly what Martin Luther King is saying in this regard. And I want to finish up, Adam, with this quote. Frederick Douglass, he said that I am a Republican, a black dyed-in-the-wool Republican, and I never intend to belong to any other party than the party of freedom and progress. And of course, we are the party of freedom. We are the party that created the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of ending slavery, of giving due and equal process to the freed Black Americans, and then also giving them the right to vote. And we as Republicans need to be proud of those great accomplishments and to tell people and to let others know of our great heritage. And it's interesting that Douglass uses the word progress. Of course, really the first progressive essentially was Theodore Roosevelt, who was a Republican. And of course, that word progress is taken by Woodrow Wilson and FDR, took us in a whole different direction, unfortunately. But we have to heed the words. And this is why, and I told you when I initially met you, Adam, and had the pleasure of meeting you at the Faith and Freedom Conference, that we as constitutional Republicans have a great desire to bring our Black American brothers and sisters back into a constitutional Republican Party. As you well know, that the freed Blacks were all Republicans after the Civil War. And unfortunately, leadership within the Republican Party has ebbed and flowed. There's been peaks and valleys since then. And that in some regards, they've forgotten our Black communities. But we want to restore that relationship. And we want to let our Black communities know that as Republicans, we will represent their natural rights and we will not discriminate. And as we finish up, I wanted to show Adam your wonderful page, your wrongspeak.net, and speak to that a little bit. There's the bio. I'm sorry we didn't get into more detail on your bio, but we'll have you back again to talk about that. But talk a little bit about wrongspeak.net.
Yeah, so basically I created WrongSpeak initially kind of for myself when I initially started writing the book, as an outlet to kind of just speak, speak openly, and just kind of discuss things. But then it kind of turned into, I wanted to advocate for people to write openly. So one of the things I'm really proud of is, getting people, for example, I got someone from big tech to write an article, hiding their identity, but just to describe what they felt like and, felt like working in that particular environment, what it's like to work there. And, they felt really cathartic about the whole experience. It's like, oh, I finally got to put that out there and see what people think, because they had to hide it. And I know what that feeling's like, where you're worried about what other people think about your viewpoints, and it doesn't feel like you can express yourself. So in many ways, I wanted WrongSpeak to be a platform to encourage other people to write articles. I'm constantly, I'm on Twitter and I ask people questions, have conversations with people, and sometimes they'll say something and I'm like, that's interesting. Do you want to write an article about it? That's how I got this person from big tech. And so, more and more people are sending me articles who want to express themselves. There's a general vibe where it's not very antagonistic. It's many ways kind of counterculture, but and for a lot of people, including myself, it's more thought-provoking. I've thankfully had more and more people who want to write articles, so I haven't had to write as much on here. I want it to be more of an open platform for people to write and express themselves. I just recently got someone who is a first staff writer who's going to consistently contribute. And for them, same type of thing. They were just an avatar and a random name. And, with encouragement, I helped them to become that person, to show their name, use their name, show their face, and speak openly. And they're like a different person today, because they become brave. They found their voice and they want to express it even more so now. So I think more people need to stop being afraid of cancel culture. You know, what I'm doing sounds brave, but really isn't that brave. You know, there are more people who agree with me and you than the extremists who want to censor everything. And so we need to stop letting them control the narrative on fear.
And a good faith space, that's the Twitter account, the handle, correct?
No, Good Faith Space is a weekly show that I do every Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. Different topic, different
Oh,
panel.
great.
So here are some previous discussions that people can listen to on YouTube.
Great.
Every episode is recorded. They're all very interesting. I would say one of my favorites is the mental health and military. It was a very eye-opening conversations. Much of it was kind of me just moderating, but it was very interesting just listening to all the experiences. And the great thing about spaces is that I'll have a panel of like 4 or 5 people, but then at one point I open the floor to people to speak. And that the mental health and the military episode, there were mostly veterans who were there who spoke about their experience with the VA. And I didn't realize how much of an issue the VA was. And this goes back to government ineptitude and all the different issues that they had. So for the people who are listening, I highly recommend just giving it a listen to. It was emotional. It was eye-opening. The conversation around suicide and all these different things. So I highly recommend.
Make sure that you subscribe to Adam's channel. I just did. I'm looking forward to hearing these discussions. And you want to support Adam any way that we can. And essentially, Adam, we're aligned perfectly with our constitutional Republican organization and your desire to educate. And that's exactly what we are doing. And we're educating our citizens. We talk a lot about civics and history. And of course, you're dealing with the issues that are very, very important and very contemporary within our Black communities in the nation. And we certainly have had a great discussion with you, and we will have this will be on YouTube. It will be up on our NJCR group page, and we'll provide links, Adam, to the book that they can purchase and to wrongspeak.net, and also to the YouTube channel that you've created. So I can't thank you enough, and please leave us with any thoughts that you may have as we conclude our fascinating discussion tonight.
I guess the final thoughts I have is, people should be more optimistic about the world that we're in. Things are changing, even though we have a lot of Marxists who are now popping their heads out. There is a growing counterculture. There's a lot of people who were apolitical, who are becoming more political, who are taking charge of their lives. I'm one of those examples. I appreciate all the praise and people giving me compliments, but I honestly just see myself as an average American who just got tired of staying quiet. And if I can do it, I think many of other people can do it. So if writing is your way of expressing yourself, do it. If you want to have a podcast, go ahead and do it. Contribute to the conversation. And you never know who will hear what you have to say or how you might impact people or who you meet along the way. So this entire experience, I had no expectations. And the fact that people want to hear what I have to say, who aren't trying to dictate what I'm trying to say. And I've received far more positive responses than negative. It's been well worth doing so, and having people think about things in a different light that isn't introduced in the mainstream, and to do it independently, and to not be censored and just say what I want to say has been extremely important and freeing for myself. So I've had, by the grace of God, a lot of positive things that have come out of this entire experience, meeting great people like yourself in person and being on here. I'm always grateful. So I appreciate you having me on here. But I guess my last thing is people just be optimistic and speak up for yourself.
Well, Adam, we're certainly glad that you've decided to speak up, and we're going to support you and what you're doing. And we want to work together with you to get this word out. Here's that book you're going to want to get. It's a fascinating read, and it gives us a great amount of information. It also gives us the prescription for what needs to be done. And of course, the Constitutional Republicans are very, very sensitive to what has happened to our Black Americans from prior to the Civil War, and the winning of the Civil War, and the failures of Reconstruction, and the failures of Jim Crow, and what has happened in the 20th century. We've come a long way. We are making progress, as Frederick Douglass said, that he would be always a part of the party of freedom and progress. And we believe as Republicans, we need to gain back the confidence of our Black communities. Thank you so much, Adam. We will have you on again soon, I hope. And we'll be talking to you. And we really, really appreciate your time tonight. It was a great discussion, very invigorating. I hope our audience enjoyed it as well. So as we finish up, we'll remember what Lincoln said, and Abraham Lincoln said, liberty to all. Thank you. Thank you, Adam.